In the glittering halls of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a billionaire leaned close to his companion, sneering in broken French as he mocked the young waitress who poured his wine. He believed she was nothing, a shadow, a servant, invisible. But when she straightened her back and answered him in flawless Parisian French, the room froze. In that single chilling moment, the mask slipped, and the daughter of a disgraced art historian revealed herself. What followed would not only shatter his pride, but tear down his entire empire. The air inside Lawrence, one of New York City's most exclusive restaurants, was different from any ordinary dining hall. It carried a fragrance of polished mahogany and faint truffle oil, the scent of wealth carefully bottled and released like perfume. From the 65th floor, windows stretched wide across the city, revealing a glittering Central Park far below. To the elite gathered here, this height was not just a view, but a declaration of power. Among the silent staff moving like shadows through this gilded stage was Elise Fontaine. At 26, with storm-gray eyes and raven-dark hair tied into a neat knot, she seemed perfectly built for invisibility. Her movements were precise, her smile polite yet distant, her voice soft but firm when needed. She refilled glasses before they reached half-empty and cleared plates without sound, a ghost gliding across expensive carpets. Yet Elisa's life had not always been spent in quiet servitude. Born into the Fontaine family, she had once lived inside the very world she now served. Her father, Henri Fontaine, was a celebrated French art historian, a man whose single nod could double the value of a Renaissance canvas. Her mother, Marianne, was the cultured daughter of a diplomat, known for her elegant soirees and refined taste. Elise grew up surrounded by museum galas, summers in Provence, and lessons in fencing, piano, and 3 languages. French was not learned in school, but in lullabies and whispered arguments between her parents. That charmed world collapsed 5 years earlier. Henri Fontaine had authenticated a newly discovered masterpiece titled The Alchemist's Daughter, a supposed work by the Dutch master Vermeer. He staked his reputation on its authenticity, only for it to be exposed as a brilliant modern forgery months later. The scandal spread like wildfire. Auction houses severed ties, colleagues turned their backs, and the press shredded his name. Accusations of corruption and bribery clung to him like tar. Henri insisted he was framed, pointing to a rival named Victor Langston, but his words were drowned beneath headlines branding him a fraud. The devastation went beyond reputation. Legal fees consumed their fortune, their home was sold, and the Fontaine family fell from privilege to poverty. Worse still, the strain broke Henri's health. A massive stroke left him partially paralyzed and robbed him of fluent speech, confining him to a wheelchair. Marianne, unable to bear the humiliation and weight of illness, developed a chronic condition that required expensive treatment. Elise, then a promising art history student at Columbia, abandoned her studies to shoulder the burden. It was bitter irony. Night after night, Elise now served the very type of people who once courted her family. Men and women who had toasted her father at grand museum dinners now pretended not to recognize his daughter as she poured their wine. Every shift was a test of endurance, her rage buried beneath a mask of polite efficiency. Her only confidant inside the restaurant was Rosa Martinez, another waitress, sharp-tongued but kind. "I don't know how you do it, Elise," Rosa whispered one evening as they polished silverware in the back. "If one more rich fool snaps his fingers at me, I'll stab him with this butter knife." Elise gave a faint smile, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Patience is a weapon, Rosa. The key is knowing when to use it." She lifted a fork and studied her own reflection in its polished surface. What looked back at her was a young woman with tired eyes, but also a fire that no humiliation could extinguish. That fire found its spark on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday evening. Mr. Laurent, the severe French manager who ruled the staff with military precision, delivered news that stirred the dining hall like a sudden wind. "Tonight," he announced, "we host Victor Langston. Everything must be perfect. Elise, you will serve his table. Your professionalism is unmatched." Elise's expression remained neutral, but inside her chest a knot tightened. The name Langston was no stranger to her. It was carved into her family's downfall. Victor Langston, a billionaire investor known for ruthless takeovers and ostentatious displays of wealth, had been her father's partner in the Vermeer deal, the man Henri believed had orchestrated the scandal that destroyed him. Now he was coming here, to this restaurant, expecting to be served. Elise adjusted her apron, her storm-gray eyes hardening. Fate had brought her face to face with the man her family had cursed for 5 long years. She would greet him as a waitress. But she would watch him as a daughter. The dining room sharpened around the announcement as if the very chandeliers had been tuned. A fresh linen scent drifted from the sideboard. The sommelier rolled a polished cart to the service station, his hands already hovering over crystal. Mr. Laurent walked the perimeter like a general inspecting a parade. No delays. No mistakes, he said quietly. He will test you. His gaze rested on Elise. You will not blink. She did not. Elise checked her station. Folded napkins faced the same direction. Polished knives aligned like silver needles. She noted the corner banquette with the panoramic sweep of Central Park. That would be Victor Langston's throne, a perfect stage for a man who lived to be observed. The elevator chimed. Conversation lowered to a hum the way a city hushes for snowfall. 2 figures glided from the foyer. The man was tall, the kind of tall engineered by tailoring. Midnight suit. Patent shoes. A watch that announced itself without a sound. His hair was a careful wave. His smile was a blade. Victor Langston did not enter a room. Rooms presented themselves to him. On his arm, a woman in a liquid black dress shimmered like ink. Her name, offered to the hostess with a cool smile, was Sloane Vale. Langston, party of 2, he said, not as information, but as ceremony. They were seated at the corner banquette. Elise approached, spine straight, face composed into the immaculate neutrality that expensive people mistake for deference. Good evening, she said. Welcome to Lawrence. My name is Elise. May I begin with water still or sparkling? Victor did not look up at first. He was busy displaying something on his phone to Sloane. With a casual flick of 2 fingers he waved away the question. Chilled still. And bring the Treuse 98. Decant gently. Do not bruise it. Elated too, Elise said, the ghost of a smile at the edge of her voice. She crossed to the cellar, retrieved the bottle with the reverence of ritual, and returned with calm hands. The foil parted cleanly. The cork surrendered with a sigh. She tipped the first ounces into a tulip glass for approval. Victor held the glass with the posture of a man posing for a magazine. He swirled until the rim threatened to spill, sniffed with theatrical expertise, then tasted. Acceptable, he pronounced. The hour unspooled in velvet silence. Elise moved through the edge of their conversation like a tide, there and gone, never interrupting, always present. Victor's voice dominated, a smooth monologue about acquisitions, luxury residences, and the art of buying what cannot be bought. Sloane offered crystalline laughter on cue. He ordered beluga, oysters, wagyu, a shopping list of status. Elise set the mother-of-pearl spoons. She placed the caviar, the blinis, the chilled glass bowls. Victor glanced up for the first time. His eyes did not meet hers. They scanned her like inventory. A half-smile tugged at his mouth. He leaned toward Sloane, lowering his voice as if closing a velvet curtain between them and the rest of the world. The curtain was soundproof to everyone but Elise. He chose French. Regard cette petite, he murmured, his accent brutal, the vowels clubbed into submission. Un pauvre chose. Elle travaille pour de miettes. Peut-être tu n'as jamais goûté mieux que les restes de la cuisine. Sloane's laughter chimed. Victor, be nice. He continued, savoring himself. C'est la vie, ma chérie. Il y a de gens comme nous, et de gens comme yous. Elle habite charmant un petit trou quelque part dans un quartier que je traverserai jamais. The room narrowed. The clink of glass became distant thunder. Elise felt her breath hook for a heartbeat and then release. It was not the insult. She had survived sharper blades delivered with kinder hands. It was the pattern of arrogance, the cadence she knew the way sailors know a tide. People like us. People like them. It struck a buried wire and the past flashed white. Her father's study. A slammed receiver. A name spoken like a curse. Victor Langston. The silver tray in Elisa's hand suddenly carried 5 years. She set it down without a sound. A calm she trusted more than anger settled over her. The mask she wore each night did not crack. It fell away. Beneath it, the daughter her parents had raised stepped forward. Victor reached again for his glass, already forming the next clever cruelty. He expected the blank smile of service, the murmur of obedience. He found neither. Elise was still and present, the kind of stillness that commands a stage. She inclined slightly, just enough to occupy his full attention. When she spoke, the French was a blade of ice. "Monsieur," she said, the single word cutting clean. His smirk paused, curious, then wavered. She continued, each syllable precise, each consonant placed with Parisian clarity. "Si vous souhaitez humilier quelqu'un dans ma langue, commencez par elle apprendre. Votre accent est aussi lourd que vos manières." Sloane's smile fell. Victor's jaw slackened by a fraction, the way a lock slips but does not yet open. Elise did not let the moment dissipate. "In another life," she said, still in French, voice low enough to be intimate and sharp enough to be heard, "I was raised in the salons where you now rent your evenings. You wear the costume, Monsieur Langston. Do not mistake it for belonging." Silence spread from their table like ripples from a stone. A nearby couple froze mid-toast. A busser stalled, eyes lowered, ears bright. Victor stared, the calculation in his gaze stuttering as recognition failed to land. He did not know her. He only knew he had been measured and found wanting in the language he used as a toy. Elise straightened by a breath. In immaculate English her tone returned to crystalline service. "Please enjoy your caviar, sir." She turned, posture unbroken, and stepped away through the hush she had created, leaving a man who was not accustomed to being left. Behind her, she felt the flare of wounded pride ignite. She did not look back. She carried water, lifted plates, reset glassware, and let the room remember how to breathe. On the far side of the floor, Mr. Lawrence's head tilted, bird-like, following currents. He moved toward the hostess stand. A message passed. A door opened. A voice, clipped in French, carried from the kitchen corridor. "Mademoiselle Fontaine. My office. Now." Elise set her tray on the service shelf, the calm still inside her, brighter than fear. Without haste, she crossed the dining room and disappeared through the door. The hum of the dining hall faded behind Elise as the heavy door clicked shut. She stood in a narrow corridor, its walls lined with framed photographs of celebrity patrons smiling beside Mr. Laurent. The air here smelled less of truffle oil and polished wood, more of dish soap and the faint metallic tang of the service elevator. She walked toward the manager's office, every step deliberate, her shoes making no sound against the carpet runner. Inside, the office was a small square box tucked away from the glamour of the restaurant. A single desk lamp cast yellow light over stacks of invoices and reservation logs. The walls bore schedules pinned with pushpins, scribbled notes in Mr. Lawrence's precise hand, and a calendar marked with supplier deadlines. Behind the desk, Mr. Laurent sat stiffly, his fingers steepled, his expression carved from stone. "Fermez la porte," he said. Elise obeyed, the latch snapping shut with finality. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Elise lowered herself into the chair, her posture straight, her face calm. Mr. Laurent studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured and sharp. "Mr. Langston has left the restaurant. He has informed the hostess he was egregiously insulted by his server and that he will be contacting ownership in the morning. He demands your dismissal. So, Elise, I will ask you one time only. What did you do?" Elise met his gaze without flinching. "I spoke to him in French." Laurent's brows flicked upward, the first crack in his composure. "You spoke to him in French?" "Yes," Elise said. Her voice carried no tremor, no apology. Only steady truth. "And what, exactly, did you say?" Elise inhaled, gathering the words as if they were weapons she now chose to display. "He was speaking about me to his companion. He assumed that, because I am a waitress, I was uneducated. He called me a poor little thing who survives on scraps from the kitchen. He mocked my presumed station." Her storm-gray eyes sharpened. "I suggested, in his chosen language, that if he wished to insult someone in French, he should first learn the language properly. I told him his accent was as clumsy as his manners, and I reminded him that I was raised in the world he pretends to belong to." The silence in the office deepened. Mr. Laurent leaned back slowly, regarding her with an intensity that felt heavier than anger. For a moment, Elise thought he might burst into fury, but instead, he exhaled a low sound, half sigh, half laugh of disbelief. "Mademoiselle Fontaine," he said softly, the syllables of her surname pronounced differently now, weighted with recognition. "You speak like someone who has been educated, elsewhere. Who are you, truly?" Elise hesitated only a moment. This was no longer a secret she could hide. She clasped her hands together, fingers tightening, and said simply, "My father is Henri Fontaine." The name landed in the cramped room like a stone shattering glass. Laurent's eyes widened. He sat forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Henri Fontaine. The art historian. The scandal." "The same," Elise confirmed, her tone firm. Mr. Laurent rose from his chair and paced behind his desk, his hand brushing over his mouth. "Mon Dieu," he muttered. "I had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Paris knew the name Fontaine. And then, the disgrace. But you, his daughter." Elise nodded once. "And the man who mocked me tonight, Victor Langston, is the same man my father accused of framing him. My father was convinced Langston orchestrated the forgery, but no one listened. He was silenced, destroyed." Her voice hardened. "And now, he has dared to laugh at me in my own mother's tongue." Laurent stopped pacing. He studied her with new eyes, as if piecing together the quiet grace, the refined posture, the perfect French, all the traits he had seen in her but never understood. So, this was not simply a quarrel between server and patron. This was, he shook his head, searching for the word. An old war igniting. Elise inclined her head. "Exactly." Laurent sank back into his chair. He tapped his pen against the desk, the rhythm sharp and thoughtful. "You understand the danger, Elise. Langston is powerful. His influence stretches far beyond this restaurant. He will retaliate." "I understand," Elise said quietly. "If you must fire me, I will not hold it against you." A pause lingered between them. Then Laurent's expression shifted, surprising her. He shook his head, lips tightening with conviction. "Non. To hell with Victor Langston. For 5 years I have managed this establishment with one principle, excellence. And excellence, Mademoiselle Fontaine, is not money. It is class. It is integrity. You possess both. He, with all his wealth, possesses neither." Elisa's composure finally cracked, though only slightly. Her eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through. Laurent's voice grew firm. "You are not fired. Take the rest of the night off, with full pay. Go home to your family." For the first time since stepping into the office, Elise felt her breath loosen in her chest. She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Monsieur Laurent." "Do not thank me," he replied. "Consider it a matter of national pride. He insulted you in my language. I cannot forgive that." "But, Elise," his tone darkened. "Be careful. Men like Langston do not walk away from humiliation. They seek to bury it." Elise rose, steadying herself, and left the office. She walked out into the night air of Columbus Circle, the city spread wide and glittering before her. The cool wind touched her face like a warning and a promise. She knew one thing with certainty: tonight had changed everything. Her patience had found its target. And her war with Victor Langston had only just begun. The subway ride to Queens blurred past Elise in a haze of steel and neon. The train clattered through tunnels, her reflection flashing against the dark windows. She sat rigid, her fingers gripping the handle of her worn leather satchel, mind replaying every second of the confrontation. Victor Langston's smug smile, the way his jaw slackened when she spoke in flawless French, the sharp silence that followed. For 5 years she had lived in the shadows, waiting tables, keeping her head bowed. But tonight, the mask had slipped, and she had shown herself for who she truly was. When she climbed the narrow stairwell to the 3rd floor of her modest walk-up apartment, the familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapped around her like an embrace. Inside, the small living room was dim. Her mother, Marianne, slept in an armchair, a thin blanket slipping from her shoulders, an open book of French poetry resting across her lap. Elise carefully lifted the book, slid a bookmark between its pages, and draped the blanket more securely. For a moment, she studied her mother's face, the fine lines, the pale fragility that seemed to deepen each year since their fall. A pang of guilt passed through her, sharper than the chill outside. She moved quietly to the adjoining room. Her father's study had been transformed into his bedroom after the stroke, the desk crowded with bottles of medicine, journals, and half-finished puzzles meant to strengthen his hand. Henri Fontaine sat by the window in his wheelchair, the lamplight outlining the sharp planes of his face. His once commanding figure had thinned, but his eyes, stormy blue and piercing, still carried the brilliance that had once captivated the art world. When Elise entered, his gaze lifted to hers, searching. He could always tell when something was different. She knelt by his chair, taking his frail but steady hand into her own. "Papa," she whispered. "I saw him tonight." Henry's good hand twitched, his knuckles tightening. His lips struggled, shaping sounds that broke into guttural fragments, but Elise understood the intent. Rage. Recognition. "Yes," she said softly. "Victor Langston. He came to the restaurant. He didn't recognize me, but I knew him. He mocked me, mocked us, in French. He thought I was no one. But I answered him. I didn't stay silent." She recounted the entire exchange, her voice low and steady, repeating each word as she had delivered it. As she spoke, she watched her father's face shift, from fury to shock, then to something else. Pride. His chest rose with labored breaths, and in his eyes, a fire burned brighter than she had seen in years. A single tear slid down his cheek. He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "It has begun," Elise whispered, echoing the silent message in his gaze. She sat with him until his hand loosened, until exhaustion dimmed the fire into weary calm. Rising, she crossed to the old trunk beneath her bed. She pulled it into the light, the leather worn from years of use. Inside lay remnants of her past life, university textbooks marked with her neat handwriting, photographs of museum galas where she stood beside her parents, and, at the very bottom, her father's private journals. Elise lifted one carefully, tracing her fingers over the looping script embossed on the leather cover. She had packed these away because the memories hurt too much. But now, they were no longer relics of grief. They were weapons. She opened the journal to entries from the months leading up to the scandal. Her father's voice filled the pages, sharp observations, detailed sketches of brushstrokes, pigment analyses noted with almost obsessive precision. One entry stood out, written in a more agitated hand. Something is wrong with the lead tin yellow. The particle composition is too uniform, too perfect. It lacks the subtle inclusions of silica one would expect from the 17th century milling process. I raised my concerns with Langston today. He dismissed me. He said this is our golden goose. Don't ruin it with academic fussiness. Elisa's pulse quickened as she read further. He has already pre-sold shares in the painting to investors. If it is revealed as a fake, he will be ruined. His eagerness is unnatural, driven by greed, not passion for art. I am certain now. It is a forgery, a masterful one. I recognize the cross-hatching style in the sleeve, a signature of a known 20th century forger. I must send for independent analysis. Tomorrow I will confront Langston with my findings. The truth must come out. The following page was dated only 2 days before the public disgrace. An anonymous tip has surfaced. They are framing me. If the analysis does not arrive in time, everything will collapse. Elisa's hands trembled. The truth was here, preserved in ink and paper. Her father had been silenced before he could expose Langston. The forged reports, the Swiss bank account, the sudden collapse, it was all orchestrated. She closed the journal, clutching it to her chest, her heart pounding. For years she had hidden, bowing her head under the weight of shame. No more. Langston had mocked her, believing her powerless, but she was not powerless. She had proof. The city outside her window glowed with endless light, but for Elise, the night felt darker, sharper, alive with purpose. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The waitress was gone. What stared back was Elise Fontaine, daughter of Henri, and the woman who would destroy Victor Langston, not with money, but with truth. Her war had found its beginning. Morning sunlight pushed through thin curtains, painting the cramped apartment in pale gold. Elise sat at the small kitchen table, her father's journal stacked in front of her, a cup of untouched coffee cooling by her elbow. She had spent the night reading, poring over Henri Fontaine's meticulous notes. Every line confirmed the same truth: Victor Langston had engineered the scandal, silenced her father, and stolen both reputation and fortune. But proof hidden in journals was not enough. Langston was a billionaire with friends in high places, protected by money and fear. Elise needed a weapon stronger than evidence on paper. She needed a voice powerful enough to echo through the corridors of power. Her mind settled on a single name: Charles Whitmore. Charles had once been the lion of investigative journalism, the kind of reporter whose exposés toppled CEOs and sent crooked financiers into exile. Years ago, he had written one of the only skeptical articles about her father's fall, questioning the suspicious perfection of the evidence against Henri. He had seen what others ignored. If anyone could help her transform her father's journals into a storm, it was him. Finding him was another matter. Whitmore had retired after clashing with his paper's new corporate owners. Rumors said he had retreated into obscurity, living among his books somewhere in the East Village. Elise spent the day chasing whispers, old directories, forgotten press clippings, and contacts willing to trade information for persistence. By late afternoon, her search led her to a narrow bookstore called The Final Word. Its sign hung crooked above a dusty window filled with yellowed hardbacks and stacks of newspapers decades old. Elise pushed open the door. A bell chimed weakly, and the smell of old paper and ink wrapped around her. Behind a fortress of books piled high on the counter, a man sat hunched over a newspaper. His gray hair was thinning, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes sharp even behind heavy glasses. Without looking up, he muttered, "We close in 5 minutes." "Mr. Whitmore," Elise said, her voice steady. "My name is Elise Fontaine. My father was Henri Fontaine." The newspaper lowered slowly. His pale eyes locked onto hers, studying with sudden intensity. "I remember the name," he rasped. "That scandal was a masterpiece of misdirection. But it's old and cold. Why are you here?" Elise stepped closer, placing her father's journal on the counter between them. Because I want to reignite it. This is his private research from before the scandal. It proves he knew the alchemist's daughter was a forgery. It proves Victor Langston silenced him. Whitmore hesitated, his weathered hands brushing the cover before flipping it open. He read silently for several minutes, lips tightening as his eyes scanned Henry's looping script. Finally, he closed the book with deliberate care. A diary, he said. Langston's lawyers would tear it apart. They'll claim your father wrote it after the fact. Elise shook her head firmly. Impossible. He suffered a stroke 5 years ago. He hasn't been able to write his own name since. These entries are real, dated in his hand before the scandal erupted. And he mentioned specific forensic details, the cross-hatching technique, the pigment irregularities, that match known forgers' signatures. Something flickered across Whitmore's face, the dormant fire of a hunter catching scent of prey. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. All right, Miss Fontaine. You've got my attention. But to nail a man like Langston, we need more than this. We need evidence no one can dismiss. We need a cannonball. Elise nodded. Then we'll find it. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, measuring her resolve. Langston is hosting his annual Patron's Heart Gala in 2 weeks. The centerpiece this year is a sketch supposedly tied to the alchemist's daughter. He'll use the event to polish his lie in front of the world. That is your stage. But the cannonball, that will have to come from the painting itself. Elisa's pulse quickened. The original hangs in his private collection. Exactly, Whitmore said, a grim smile forming. If we can capture high-resolution, multispectral images, we might reveal the forgery's hidden signature, proof no court could ignore. But getting inside his fortress of a penthouse won't be easy. He paused, then chuckled bitterly. Luckily, Langston just hired a new private curator, my nephew, Alastair. Brilliant, naive, desperate to impress. I can push him to bring in a specialist photographer to help catalog the collection. That specialist will be you. Elise felt the weight of fate settle over her shoulders. For years she had lived powerless, a ghost in her own life. Now she had a plan, a partner, and a path. It was dangerous, reckless even, but her storm-gray eyes burned with purpose. Then it's settled, she said. I'll walk into Langston's world and take from him the proof he thought buried. Whitmore studied her, then gave a single, sharp nod. Careful, Miss Fontaine. Men like Langston don't forgive. They destroy. If we go after him, there is no turning back. Elisa's reply came without hesitation. I don't want him to forgive me. I want him to fall. The following 10 days moved like a storm. Elise transformed herself piece by piece, discarding the skin of a waitress and adopting a new identity. In the hushed halls of the New York Public Library, she studied the technical language of art forensics, memorizing methods of pigment analysis and photographic cataloging. With the last of her savings and a loan from Whitmore, she acquired her disguise, a tailored suit of understated elegance, glasses that softened her features, and a fabricated portfolio of photographic work. By the time Whitmore introduced her to his nephew Alastair, she was no longer Elise Fontaine, waitress of Lawrence. She was Anna Rousseau, an independent art photographer with a sterling reputation. Alastair Whitmore was as Charles had promised, young, nervous, a little too eager. His tweed jacket seemed borrowed, his handshake clammy. Mr. Langston just hired me to catalog his private collection, he explained breathlessly. But I need help. Photographic documentation is beyond me. When my uncle suggested you, I knew it was the answer. Elise gave a professional smile, her voice calm and clipped. I'd be honored to assist. The plan unfurled without a hitch. Days later, Elise found herself standing outside one of Langston's glass and steel towers on Billionaire's Row. The building rose like a monument to arrogance, its mirrored facade reflecting the city as if it owned the skyline. Inside, security checkpoints gleamed with chrome and marble. Guards in tailored suits carried earpieces, their expressions cold and unreadable. Alistair fumbled with his ID, introducing Elise as his contracted assistant. To her relief, the guards barely glanced at her. A nobody, she thought. That was her shield. The elevator carried them upward with a soft hum. Elisa's pulse quickened with each floor passed. When the doors opened, she stepped into Victor Langston's world. The penthouse was less a home than a gallery. White walls stretched high, hung with paintings that whispered of power, Rothko, Bacon, Giacometti. Sculptures stood like frozen sentinels on polished stone pedestals. But at the heart of the room, commanding the space like a queen on her throne, hung the alchemist's daughter. Seeing it in person sent a chill through Elise. The forgery was exquisite, flawless to an untrained eye. But to her, it was a wound made visible, a reminder of everything her family had lost. She forced her expression into neutrality. "Mr. Langston will join us shortly," Alistair muttered nervously. "Best to begin with the lesser works first." Elise nodded, unpacking her equipment. She worked methodically, photographing several canvases and sculptures with practiced precision. Her cover had to be airtight. Every movement was calm, efficient, professional. It was then that Victor Langston entered. He wore a cashmere tracksuit that cost more than most apartments, his hair perfectly styled despite the casual attire. His presence was a weight pressing down on the room. "Alistair," he said lazily, "this is the assistant." "Yes, sir," Alistair stammered. "Anna Rousseau, one of the best in her field." Langston's reptilian eyes swept over Elise. She felt the air catch in her throat, waiting. Did he see her, remember the waitress who had gutted him in French? But his gaze slid past her without pause. To him, she was invisible. A specialist, nothing more. "Fine," Langston said dismissively. "Don't touch anything." He turned away, already absorbed by the stock ticker scrolling across his massive television. Relief washed through Elise like a tide, but she dared not show it. She continued her work, her hands steady though her heart thundered. Hours passed. Piece by piece, she documented the collection until only the forgery remained. Finally, standing before the alchemist's daughter, Elise spoke evenly. "Given its provenance, I'll need to use multispectral imaging to create a full record for the insurance catalog." "Of course," Alistair said eagerly, oblivious to the storm beneath her words. She fitted the infrared lens onto her camera and aimed at the painting's sleeve, exactly where her father's journal had described. At first, the surface revealed nothing but fine brushstrokes. Then, on the camera's small digital screen, ghostly lines emerged, cross-hatching, precise and deliberate. A signature hidden beneath the paint, unmistakable as a fingerprint. Elise's breath caught, but she kept her posture calm. She snapped frame after frame, capturing every angle, every detail. Proof. Finally, undeniable proof. She downloaded the images onto an encrypted drive, wiped the memory card clean, and packed her gear with meticulous care. The evidence was now hers. Langston sauntered over, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Beautiful piece, isn't it? My Vermeer." The temptation to strike him with the truth surged hot in Elisa's chest. But she swallowed it down, her face remaining a mask of professional detachment. "A most compelling work, Mr. Langston," she said evenly. "Truly fascinating for technical analysis." Langston's smile curved with smug satisfaction, mistaking her words as admiration. He dismissed her with a wave. "Good. That will be all." Elise followed Alistair to the elevator. She kept her steps measured, but inside, adrenaline roared. She had walked into the lion's den, stood before the monster, and taken the weapon that would end him. When the doors closed behind her, she pressed the encrypted drive tighter against her palm. It felt like a detonator. The ghost of Henri Fontaine had finally spoken through her. And Victor Langston's empire was living on borrowed time. The fortnight leading to the Patron's Heart Gala was a blur of relentless preparation. Elise spent her nights at Charles Whitmore's dusty bookstore, which had transformed into a war room. The smell of old paper mixed with the hum of a printer spitting out documents. On one wall, Whitmore pinned photographs, journal excerpts, and timelines with pushpins and string. The journals of Henri Fontaine were no longer relics of tragedy. They were evidence. Ammunition. Dr. Alessandra Bianchi, Henry's old colleague and a world-renowned pigment analyst, responded swiftly to Elise's encrypted message. The multispectral images Elise had captured were analyzed in Florence. 3 days later, Bianchi's report arrived, decisive and irrefutable. The pigment inconsistencies matched her father's notes. The cross-hatching style revealed under the sleeve was compared side by side with known works of a 20th-century forger. The match was perfect. The conclusion was stated with absolute certainty: The Alchemist's Daughter was not Vermeer. It was a modern forgery. Elise read the words over and over, her pulse quickening. Proof. The cannonball. Whitmore assembled everything into a press kit: Bianchi's findings, Henry's journal excerpts, timelines of Langston's suspicious financial moves. He whispered to his old contacts at the district attorney's office and the SEC, telling them to watch Langston's gala closely. Think of it as a philanthropic anomaly, he said slyly. But more than evidence and contacts, Elise needed to prepare herself. She could not face Victor Langston as a bitter waitress or as a timid academic assistant. She had to stand before him as the heir to her father's name, the rightful daughter of Henri Fontaine. With Whitmore's help, she acquired a gown of deep sapphire silk, vintage yet timeless. She pinned her hair into an elegant chignon, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings that had once belonged to her mother. When she gazed into the mirror, she saw no trace of the waitress who served glasses of water in silence. She saw a woman forged in fire, her storm-gray eyes alight with purpose. The night of the gala arrived. The Temple of Dender at the Metropolitan Museum glowed beneath chandeliers, a palace of glass and stone where New York's elite preened and paraded. Perfume hung in the air like fog, mingling with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. Elise entered quietly, her presence almost spectral, slipping between groups who failed to recognize her. To them, she was an elegant stranger. To herself, she was a ghost walking among courtiers. And there, at the center of it all, stood Victor Langston. He was radiant in his pride, his black tuxedo gleaming, his smile flashing beneath the golden light. On his arm sparkled Sloane veil, glittering with diamonds that caught every reflection. He held court with senators, financiers, and museum directors, a king among flatterers. Elise claimed a glass of champagne, the stem cool in her fingers, grounding her. She found Whitmore lingering at the edges of the crowd, rumpled in his suit but watchful. He gave her a single sharp nod. It was time. Langston eventually stepped onto the stage, basking in applause. His voice poured over the audience, smooth as silk. "It is the greatest honor of my life," he declared, "to support the arts. And in that spirit, I am delighted to unveil a piece from my private collection for tonight's auction." The cloth fell away, revealing the charcoal sketch, the supposed study for the alchemist's daughter. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bidding began almost instantly, hands rising as numbers climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Langston's smile widened with every call, his fraud gilded with fresh validation. The auctioneer's gavel rose. "Sold to the gentleman in the third row for $500,000. Wait." The single word cut through the hall like a blade. The gavel froze. Heads turned. Whispers cascaded. Elise stepped from the shadows, her sapphire gown catching the light, her gaze locked on the stage. Langston's expression flickered, first annoyance, then shock as she spoke her name. "I am Elise Fontaine, daughter of Henri Fontaine." A collective gasp swept the hall. For years, her family's name had been synonymous with scandal. And now, here was the daughter, standing tall in the very temple of art where they had once been celebrated. Langston's face drained of color. "Security," he hissed, his composure splintering. "Remove this woman." 2 guards moved, but Charles Whitmore stepped forward, flashing his press credentials. "She has a right to be heard," he declared with iron in his voice. Elisa's focus did not waver. She pointed to the sketch. "This is not the work of a 17th-century master. It is an accessory to fraud. And the painting itself, The Alchemist's Daughter, is no masterpiece. It is a forgery." Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into a storm. Screens above the stage flickered as Elise raised her phone. Images appeared, her father's journal entries, his elegant script describing his suspicions. Then came the infrared photographs, the forger's signature cross-hatching circled in red. Side by side with known forgeries, the patterns were undeniable. The room erupted in chaos. Langston shouted, his voice cracking, "Lies. Fabricated evidence. She's a bitter girl avenging her criminal father." Elisa's voice rang out, sharp as glass. "My father was not a criminal. He was framed, by you, Victor Langston. You pre-sold shares in a painting you knew was false. When my father prepared to expose you, you silenced him with forged reports and an invented scandal. Tonight, the truth stands where your lies fall." The crowd's energy surged. Whispers turned to outrage, allies slipping away from Langston like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Sweat beaded his forehead. His empire trembled before their eyes. And then, from the side of the stage, Alastair Whitmore appeared, pale but resolute, holding a tablet. His voice shook but carried. "Mr. Langston, your own records show a payment, $2 million, to a shell corporation tied directly to the forged authentication report. 2 days before Henri Fontaine was ruined." The dagger struck home. The silence that followed was damning. The fraud was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was proof. Victor Langston, the untouchable billionaire, stood exposed under the hot lights. And Elise Fontaine, once a ghost in the shadows, had become his reckoning. For a suspended moment, the entire hall seemed frozen in place. The chandeliers blazed overhead, but their golden glow only served to highlight Victor Langston's ashen face. His lips parted, his jaw trembled, and for the first time in his career of arrogance, words deserted him. Then the room erupted. Gasps gave way to shouts. Murmurs grew into a rising tide of outrage. Patrons who had once smiled at Langston now recoiled, their expensive shoes scraping against marble as they tried to distance themselves from him. A woman clutched her pearls, whispering frantically to her husband. A senator who had been shaking Langston's hand moments before now turned his back. Langston raised his voice, desperate, the sharp edge of panic bleeding into his tone. "This is slander. Lies manufactured by a bitter girl. You will all regret giving her an audience." But his roar was drowned out as the massive screens flanking the stage continued to display the evidence. Henri Fontaine's elegant handwriting, the journal entries, the technical notes, and then the damning forensic analysis by Dr. Alessandro Bianchi. Each slide tore another piece of credibility away from him. Elise stood unwavering, her storm-gray eyes locked on him. Her voice, though calm, cut through the chaos like a blade. "You cannot bury the truth, Victor Langston. Not with money. Not with lies. Tonight, the ghost you tried to silence stands before you. And she will not be silenced again." A ripple swept through the crowd as uniformed officers entered the hall, followed by 2 detectives in tailored suits. Their movements were calm, deliberate, inevitable. They threaded through the crowd until they stood directly before the stage. "Victor Langston," one detective said, his voice firm but steady. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and art forgery. You have the right to remain silent." The hall fell into stunned silence. Cameras clicked, phones lifted, the audience transforming into witnesses. Langston's face twisted, his bravado collapsing into something raw and pitiful. He tried to protest, his voice cracking, but the officers were already securing his wrists in steel cuffs. As they led him from the stage, the great Victor Langston, once a titan of finance, feared and envied, was reduced to nothing more than a criminal dragged into the light. The crowd erupted again, but this time it was not outrage. It was something closer to awe. Whispers filled the room, names carried through the air: Elise Fontaine. Henri Fontaine's daughter, she proved it, after all these years. Whitmore moved to Elise's side, his expression both weary and proud. "You did it," he murmured. Elise shook her head softly. "We did it. My father did it." She lifted her eyes toward the screen still glowing with evidence, her father's handwriting illuminated for all to see. He was right all along. Later that night, Elise returned home to Queens. The city still glittered, but to her it felt changed, alive with a new kind of light. When she entered their small apartment, she found her mother asleep in her chair, the same poetry book resting on her lap. Elise carefully tucked the blanket around her and pressed a kiss to her forehead. In the next room, Henri was awake, his eyes sharp and questioning. Elise knelt beside him, placing her hand in his. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady. "Papa, it's over. The world knows the truth. You are vindicated." A sound escaped his throat, broken yet fierce, half sob and half laugh. His hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. For the first time in years, his eyes gleamed not with sorrow, but with peace. Elise stayed there a long time, her head resting against his hand, her heart steady. She had not only defended his honor, she had restored it. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Langston's empire collapsed under investigation. His assets were frozen, his allies abandoned him, and every headline carried his name alongside the word fraud. But beside those headlines appeared another name, spoken with admiration: Henri Fontaine. The man once branded a liar was now remembered as a genius, a victim of greed, a martyr to truth. Elise used the restitution funds and donations from museums to establish the Fontaine Foundation, an organization dedicated to exposing art fraud and supporting young artists. The waitress who had once been invisible was invisible no more. Elise Fontaine had risen from the ashes of disgrace to become a defender of integrity in a world poisoned by greed. And though the world saw her as a heroine, she knew she was something simpler. She was a daughter who had kept her father's honor alive, who had carried his ghost into the light, and who had destroyed the monster that haunted them. In the quiet of her small room, Elise closed the last of her father's journals, her fingers lingering on the leather cover. Through the window, the city shimmered. For the first time in years, she did not see a battlefield. She saw possibility. The waitress was gone. The ghost was gone. What remained was Elise Fontaine. And she was finally free. Every act of arrogance eventually meets its reckoning. This story reminds us that true power does not come from wealth, position, or pride, but from integrity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Elise Fontaine's journey teaches us that patience, when paired with justice, can shatter even the mightiest empire built on lies. This is a fictional work created to feel realistic, so that we may reflect on its lessons about humility, justice, and the strength to stand tall against oppression. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below about which moment struck you the most. We'd love to hear your thoughts.